They're going to play some music. It doesn't make that kind of noise.
Hit the lights and let's welcome Captain DJ and Jazzy Jeff.
Maybe they're not going to do the...
Hey. Caleb.
Yeah.
Tell him to turn on the lights.
They did. Turn on the lights.
DJ and Jazzy Jeff seem lost.
Just go? Or not yet? Okay.
Hey, does anyone see them? Captain DJ and Jazzy Jeff, please come to the front.
Just go. He says to go.
Please come to the front, Captain DJ.
Oh! Oh! Oh, hardy, har to you! Oh! Watch out, Miss Maria! Watch out, Miss Maria! Ha ha ha! Woo! Whoa! Hardy, har har! I, Captain Baldbeard, have hijacked ye old VBS. The only thing scarier than a pirate be a pirate on a motorcycle. I have confiscated all of the cookies. The little crab hats that the servers wear are mine. Aboard my pirate ship, aboard my pirate ship now are all of the little Polaroid pictures of all of the children. Aboard my pirate ship are all of the popcorns that you've been eating, all of the movies you've been watching. All of those things are on my pirate ship. The little boat where Paul got shipwrecked, that is on my pirate ship. And if any teacher tries to resist, you will have to walk the plank.
Whoa! What are you doing? I'm going to tell you, there's a couple things you never do. You never mess with Captain DJ. You never bring a sword to a gunfight.
They're going to walk the plank.
You also don't mess with somebody that has friends. I think I brought some reinforcements tonight that might be able to help me in my battle, because I think we're going to have to defeat him again. Do we need to defeat him again? What about my very trusty Captain Smee? Is he here somewhere? There he is!
I'm here for you, Captain.
Wait a minute, but I'm not sure that we are enough. What if we could get Thing 2 to come back? Remember Thing 2? Thing 2 is back! So I think that's all we have. Do we have another one?
If only we had more help.
Luigi! Do we have Luigi? Luigi!
No, I'd be outnumbered.
Let's go. Let's get him, guys. Come on, let's go. Go get him! 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 Come on, guys! Come on, guys! Go get him! Go get him! We're coming! We got him! I think we got him.
Watch it, Baldy!
We got him now!
Oh!
So,
You freeze. Freeze right there.
Freeze!
Wait.
Freeze! Captain Baldbeard! Captain
wait a
Baldbeard!
minute. Hey, wait.
This is your conscience!
My conscience.
You usually don't pay much attention to me, but tonight you have gone too far! Stealing the VBS!
It's just a little piratey fun. It's one of the best jobs I ever pulled.
But think of all the children who will have no cookies! Think of how sad Miss Celia will be without her crab hat! Think of how Jazzy Jeff and Captain DJ will have no life without VBS!
Aye, that'd be a good point.
And Mike Plant won't be an electric eel anymore!
'Twould be a tragedy, I admit.
Do the right thing, Baldbeard!
I will do the right thing and give back VBS to Captain DJ.
What? How cool does that mean? That, did I hear that right? That we get snacks and we have VBS back?
VBS is back!
Hey!
Oh,
Which only means one thing. Are you ready? God's king of the jungle. God's king of the sea. God's king of the universe and God's the king of me. God's the king of the jungle. God's the king of the sea. God's the king of the universe and God's the king of me. Blue skies and rainbows and sunbeams from heaven are what I can see. If my Lord's living in me, I know that Jesus is well and alive today. He makes his home in my heart. Nevermore will I be all alone since he promised me that we never would part. All right, we're about to let you go to class. Right before that, of course, we've got to sing Booster. But a couple of announcements before we go. When we come back in, before we dismiss for the evening, we have to get our big group picture. So all of us five, along with you, are going to come up here after we close at the very end for a picture. So make sure you bring your best smiles when you come back. Also, if you are in fifth grade, you will be going with the first and second grade because you will repeat a lesson if you do not. So if you're in fifth grade anywhere, you will go with first and second grade. We're going to go ahead and start dismissing you so that you can have your last VBS class. Alright, so we'll go ahead and let this group go. Y'all can go out that way. Oh, wait! Stop! Sorry, I just started hearing a chance we got a booster. So I will tell you, last night, I heard too many people say rooster instead of giving me the And so we never want to hear and and I heard somebody practicing before we all came out and y'all were here. So I'm going to let him demonstrate that that he was practicing. I saw him in the restroom. He was in the mirror and he was practicing it to make sure that it was just ready for the VBS song. All of the adults are thinking, he does not pick me right now. But you did not realize that the expert guy is wandering his organ. Oh yes! Oh yes! Can we get a... No, we gotta hear Dr. Long on his forehead. All by himself. Don't be crazy like that. Booster, be a booster, boost our Bible school. Let's try it again, and y'all can be dismissed now. Go ahead.
Very quick. We don't know, but after this evening, but no, anything you want. If you have little girls or boys, Mermaid birthday. He's decorations will be perfect. But anything you want, just come up and find us, and you're more than welcome to have it. Except for the boat. I got to ask Mr. Kelly first, because the boat's up for grabs, right?
Good. Are we on? Can you hear me? There it is. Good evening. We're going to start off with a couple songs just because, well, it's me. So we're going to start off with a couple songs before we get into class tonight. Oh, thou fount of every blessing. In my heart to sing thy grace, streams of mercy, ever ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me ever to adore thee, may I sail thy goodness through, while the hope of endless glory fills my heart with joy and love. Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. He to rescue me from danger, interposed his precious blood. Oh, to grace how great a debtor daily I constrain to be. Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Never let me wander from thee. Never leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above. Let's just skip that one. We'll just go on straight into the lesson. Open your Bibles, if you will, to Exodus. Exodus chapter 14. Actually 13, and we'll start at around verse 17. So, pretty much, I would say 99% of the people in here, if we had 100 people in here, there may be one, perhaps two people who don't know this story. It's the story of the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea. And is this a little too hot? I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know. And when we think about the story of the crossing of the Red Sea, I mean, there just seems like sometimes we kind of rush through it. We kind of, all those plagues happen. We spend a lot of time. We will spend almost a lesson per plague on each of those plagues, and we'll really dive into them. And then we'll get to Mount Sinai, and then, that's where all the old law comes from, and we spend a lot of time at Mount Sinai. But that transition period, man, transitions are not easy. Transitions are super hard. A lot of times when you are moving from one thing to another, the fancy word for it is liminal space. That's a Caleb Colley word for you. Liminal space. It's between the not yet and not anymore. So the no longer and the not yet. There's that space between the two that is called liminal space. And how we react to situations in that liminal space can say a lot about us and our character. When we think about this story, really, if you ask yourself the question, where does the story of the crossing the Red Sea start? You could really say it starts all the way back with Abraham. When that promise was given, that there was going to be a nation. And this is the first indication that we have of a nation that came from Abraham. This is that first indication that we have this whole new society of people, and they're on the move. Or you could perhaps even say it goes all the way back to the beginning. After the fall of man, after the original sin there, where Adam and Eve partook of the fruit, and then God kind of laid out his plan. Do you think he had in mind this crossing of the Red Sea? I'm sure he did, because he had already planned all the way out to Jesus and beyond. Transitions are hard. And I want us to kind of look at this story as not so much about the fact, we could talk all day about the fact that this was a miraculous thing that happened. And we'll touch on that a little bit. But really, I think the important message about this story is that transition isn't going to be easy. Transition is going to take help from God. And we see that play out in this story. I want to start, though, in chapter 13, beginning in verse 17. And this is where we're just going to we're not going to be able to read all of these passages, so we're going to kind of summarize. I think one of the cool things about this section is God spells out to Moses exactly what he wants to happen and why he's taking him in the direction that he's taking him. Because you could go, Moses, you could just go straight up the coast. Because, from Egypt to Israel, you just go around that curve of the Mediterranean and Bob's your uncle, you're there. But he says, if you go that way, if you go the way of, what is the name of it, Migdal? If you go that way, then perhaps they're going to go into that area that's populated by the Philistines. Do you know who is a Philistine? Remember one of the most famous Philistines? Goliath. Guess what? Goliath wasn't the only giant. In fact, when David picked up all those stones, he picked up enough stones, whether it was coincidence or not, one for each of his brothers. Do you think this was the first generation of those giants? Maybe, maybe not. But what God does say here is that if you go by the way of the Philistines, if you go through their territory, it's a shortcut. Absolutely, it's going to get you there quicker. But what's going to happen? You're going to get there, the children of Israel, it's going to create a war, and the children of Israel are going to turn back because these people aren't ready for war. Think about that. Are the people of Israel ready for war when they leave Israel? No. These people have been slaves all their lives. They've never held a weapon a day in their lives. The thing that they could probably say that they were closest to was perhaps some of the equipment and utensils that they had to use in their slavery. But they weren't ready for war. They weren't ready. As soon as they were going to leave, they had nothing like a sword. I'm so glad they left this here. That was perfect timing. They had no idea how to use a sword. And even though there were a great multitude of people, somewhere between 600,000 and 1.2 million, somewhere in that neighborhood, even though there were such a great swarm of people, God had no intention of leading them into war. Because He knew that they would lose heart and turn back. And so they go the southern route, down towards the Red Sea. And once they get down to the Red Sea, you see, beginning in chapter 14 there, that now Moses he's kind of changed his mind. He's decided, hey, these Israelites have done us such great harm. Our economy is in tatters. If you think COVID did a number on an economy, there's nothing that would compare to this. It could be as much as 10 weeks of these plagues, or maybe more. We have really not a great amount of timeline between each of those. The first indication that we have of the time that elapsed between the plagues is between the first and second plague. It said 7 days transpired. So if we average that out over 10 weeks of plagues, do you remember the first couple weeks of the lockdown? It started around spring break for our family, which means my wife and my son, they were already home. And spring break just kind of kept going. Then 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later, oh man, we got to start online classes. And those weeks turned into months. And for some of us, those first few months were challenging. I know it was for me. All of my plans for last summer and this summer all got canceled. For a guy who makes a living going to different countries, it was pretty, mind-blowing what this was doing. If you spit a wad of COVID-19 in your hand, you wouldn't be able to see it. And this little microscopic thing is literally shutting down the world. Earth essentially closed for business. Now, that's not even close to the impact, the personal impact that every Egyptian would have felt because of every single plague that happened. First of all, I want you to imagine one whole week where your entire water source had turned to blood, had become completely unusable. So I taught this class, in teenage class last night. One of the kids asked, "Did that blood congeal?" I don't know. They didn't send me a video, but it's blood, and first of all, everything that's in that water is going to die. Fish don't breathe blood. Not only that, but the actual blood itself and the destruction that it causes is going to start having an aroma of its own. And if you've not seen the Nile River, it's not a small one. It's one of the most famous and large rivers in all the world. I can't even imagine the odors that would come from it. Not to mention all of the water that was no longer usable. And those people had to endure a week of that. you're starting to get on the edge of, and for some people may have passed that edge of dehydration and having serious complications of that. If they had any stores up in their house, it probably went quickly. I remember one time we were in, it was Peru, and we had this cistern up above the building where we were holding our campaign, and that cistern had a leak. And we were in trouble quick. In fact, it's been more than one campaign where water is an issue. And I promise you, it's even happened at camp. It's even happened at camp where water has become an issue a time or two where, we've had to tell the kids, hey, this is the stuff that you flush, this is the stuff you don't flush. Ration your water. Make sure that, you start to see how big a role that water plays in your life. Now that's just one of 10 plagues. Then you got the frogs, the gnats, the flies, and so on, the boils, the farm animals dying. All of these terrible plagues, one after another, and if they all lasted as long as the first one lasted, you're talking 10 weeks of the nastiest things that you can imagine. Because we're not talking about South Georgia gnats, guys. I grew up in Valdosta, Georgia, the home of the southern gnat. It is the city bird. I can't tell you how many gnats in my life I have eaten. But those sand gnats in South Georgia seem to be thick as clouds. But that would have nothing on the gnats that came. Or the flies. What do you do with all that livestock that died? Right now, it would be a lot. It would be a big job, but, you'd get a couple tractors and, you'd dig large holes and you would bury them up. It would take human manpower to move those into piles and probably burn them. Now, all of that's just to say, hey, not only is there an inconvenience factor, but all of these things caused major damage to the finances of individual households. We think about it on nationwide terms of ruining the greatest economy on the planet at that time. The economy that Joseph had built centuries earlier. Now in tatters. But we don't often think about the middle-aged mom and dad with 3 kids in the house have no idea why any of this is happening. It's not like they've got Pharaoh's ear. So when we think about this crossing of the Red Sea, there's another scenario that we ought to think about as well, because the transition that would take place, I want you to imagine, one of the things we don't really get a lot of big sense about from Scripture is how is all of this organized? Like, my biggest job as a missionary in these foreign countries and taking these campaigns, my biggest job is logistics. Making sure everybody's going in the same direction and has everything they need to go, they need to have to get from point A to point B and complete the mission. That's the biggest part of my job, is the logistics of it all. And so my mind is just turning on this thing. How did they get the word out to 600,000 people? How did they get the message out that this is what's going to happen? It's hard enough to get 300 people to Bible class on time on Sunday mornings. If you've got a family of 3 or 4 or 5, getting those little ones out of bed and up in the morning and breakfast fed, little girls hair combed, little boys ducktails, wipes down, and get here on time. But 600,000 people all moving in the same direction. Getting that wheel started up that mountain, man, that just kind of blows my mind. And so God takes them from that land of Goshen, and instead of taking the shortcut, takes them down to the Red Sea. And there in chapter 14, we see the threat coming. We see the threat coming, and the threat is this. Pharaoh has said, these people have just ruined us. And now, the very people that it would take to even get back part of that wealth, we've just let go. I completely understand that logic. We're not just going to let these people walk away. Because, one, they probably deserve to be punished. But two, what, we're supposed to build our own bricks now? And so Pharaoh starts heading that way. And the children of Israel see him coming. Now, all the things that are coming are all military in nature. And the children of Israel have nothing to defend themselves with. Nothing to defend themselves with. There is nothing that they have in their power that is going to prevent Pharaoh from doing whatever it is that he wants to do to these people. I mean, perhaps he takes and kills all the men. Or perhaps he takes and kills all the women. Who knows? I mean, who knows what his plans are going to be once he captures them. But the Israelites are not poised to have any effect on what's coming at them. So they start freaking out. And then the Lord says to Moses, now this is where things get interesting. Put your hand out over the water, and these waters are going to part. I've said it before, and I will say it again. You will probably hear me say this 100 times before I pass on and leave this life. I sincerely hope that there's a replay room in heaven. Instant replay. Because and bear with my human analogies to a heavenly world, when there's a water break from the singing, I'm not going for the water, I'm going for the replay room. Because I want to see it. I want to look and see how God did this. What were the reactions of the people? What did the wall of water on either side look like? How wide was it to get 600,000 people through it? It was, and it's not like you're crossing, if the water's parted across the St. John's River, think about all the stuff that's at the bottom of that river. I mean, you got the silt and the mud and the seaweed and a million pieces of pollution. Who knows what's at the bottom of that river? But these people walked across the Red Sea on dry land. I mean, that blows my mind as much. If you think about what that would entail, that blows my mind as much as the water's actually parting. That the ground that they were walking across was dry. It's not like they were knee-deep in mud. And so they get to the other side, and the Bible kind of phrases it a little weird depending on the translation that you have. When the Egyptians start pursuing them into the Red Sea, it says that the waters crashed down on them. Now, at this point it says that the bodies were seen on the shore. The dead bodies of the Egyptians that died were seen on the shore. Now, I don't know if that means they washed up from what's been going on. They washed up on shore, or if from the shore they could see all the dead bodies. Either way, those Egyptians didn't survive. And really, this is probably the 11th plague on Egypt. Because now the military is gone. In one felt swoop. Now, I would love to say that that's the end of the story of the Red Sea, as we've just kind of recapped it not real quick. As we've recapped it, but what happens, like, we generally jump from Red Sea to Mount Sinai pretty quick in our minds. As we're going through, and we're just kind of tapping on the highlights, as we go through the Old Testament, we think, oh man, the Red Sea crossing was just right before Mount Sinai, and you'd be right on that, except there was a little incident that happened before that. Now, as we mentioned before, water is pretty important. Water is a big deal. And now, the children of Israel are a little parched. Not like weeks of on end going without water. They're a little parched. Sun maybe got a little hot. Don't necessarily, their canteen may have given out that day, that morning for breakfast. They got a little tickle in their throat. Got to clear their throat a couple times, and all of a sudden, life is just the worst. And they start giving Moses the business in chapter 16, at the end of chapter 15. Because the water source that they have right there is bitter. Now, I'm not sure if this is salt water from the Red Sea that they're trying to drink, or if it's just a water that's really dense with minerals that they literally cannot drink because it's so bitter. When you look at the what's going on right here, I mean, I don't know. I would like to think that I've got a little bit more sense than these people. I would really like to think I've got my act together a little bit better than these Israelites, right? We got a little bit more sense. An entire sea is just split in two. Just hours or days before this event. You don't think God's got you on the water thing? You don't think He's got your back on that? But I can't say that I am. I'm no better than them. I'm no better than them. I got to tell you, I've got my doubts. I've got my insecurities. I've got my complaints. I've got those things that just, the devil's got me in some of these places that he knows, he sticks his foot out and just, I fall for that trip every single time. I'm no better. No better at all. I think one of the things that's very interesting to consider at this time is that coming out of slavery for the Egyptians left them without any identity. Think about that for a minute. That's where this whole transition thing starts. Because it's not like you have left slavery and now all of a sudden you're stepping into a culture of your own where all of those pre-assumed norms are already established. All those things that are important to your family, to your culture, are already there. No, they've got none of that. They are setting up an entire culture from scratch. So think about, you can't even really, because you're so far into our culture, it's really hard to think about the norms that happen every single day, that we just kind of have this contract between one another that, hey, this is how we do life together. This is how we're all going to get along together. This is how we're all going to move forward together as best we can. And there's none of that. And so I understand why this deal with water becomes so important right at the beginning. Right? Because that search for water is basic. It is the first need. It's the first idea that they've got to have some control, because the people that were controlling their lives are no longer in charge. Now, who's going to be in charge here? Who's going to take the reins? Who's going to push us forward? How are we going to survive this? Where do we go from here? Pete, how much time we have left? Control is a big deal for most people. I'd like to tell you, as quick as I can, a story, true story, of when I lost control. August 19th, 2019. August 20th, 2019. I'm coming home from Nashville. It's the day before Aiden's birthday, and I get pulled over. Some of you know this story. I'm looking at you, Darren. Darren gives me a hard time about this story. To make a long story short, I spent about 6-7 hours in jail that night. Oh, the missionary got arrested? Yes! The missionary got arrested. To make a long story short, our beautiful buses that we've had over the years to haul our youth around. I've had the privilege of driving and have enjoyed that for a long time, but I had just kind of over the last 2 or 3 years not driven it hardly at all. Dustin and Jeff have really done a great job of taking over, and so I just kind of let my CDL lapse, which is not illegal, okay? It's not illegal. And the only way that you let it lapse is by not taking your physical, okay? I didn't take my CDL, Highway Patrol, physical in order to maintain my CDL. That's the only thing I did. It's not illegal to do that. It just nullifies that CDL. Well, the lovely folks in Pinehurst, Georgia can't read the Florida information from my license. And so they just see that the whole license is void and haul me off to the clink. Now, there's a lot more fun in that story that happens through that day, especially the reaction of my wife, like, yeah, right, what did you really do? But we laugh about it so much, and I've told that story to so many people, but the thing that hit me the most, and the thing that freaked me out the most, is that I had lost control. I'm telling you, I'm a pretty patient person. I don't feel like I get my feathers rattled very easily, but I lost control, and that was not okay. So when I think about these people and the fact that they have really no idea who's in control, I mean, we don't even really have a real good understanding of how much religious foundation they even have to even know who God is. I mean, yeah, they've heard the stories of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. They've probably heard all those stories, but this is before the law of Moses. what are their religious norms? Is there adherence to the Sabbath for them? They're slaves. They've got to work on Saturday. So what is that foundation? And if that foundation is even there, how strong could it possibly be? There's no religious hierarchy. There's no high priest. There's no tabernacle. There's none of that. All of that comes after. So the idea that they've got to rely now on God, I mean, how firm is that in their mind? We give the Israelites a hard time about all their wishy-washiness throughout this whole thing and how quickly it is that they are to grumble. But this is a time of transition. And it's hard. And they're feeling their way through it. And they're scared. And they're homeless. And they're just searching for something to hold on to. And that first something is water. Now we hear about Moses hitting the rock and speaking to the rock, but those aren't even the first of the water miracles. It's this one. He throws a log into the bitter water, and it becomes drinkable or sweet, as the Bible says. All of that to say, how perfect of a parallel is this story to our spiritual life and how we have to go through a spiritual transition after we're baptized. Think about that. Before you're baptized, you're a slave. Right? You're a slave to sin. The Bible talks about it several times. That transition, before it starts, you are in the clutches of the devil himself. You have no hope. And if you want to break free from that sin, guess what? There are people that are willing to sell you a shortcut, but it's going to cost you. You look at any televangelist on TV, they're willing to sell you some shortcuts, man. You can go right up through the Philistines area. If you want to, if that's the way you want to go, but it's not going to end well for you. And guess what? It's not going to do you any good. Because it's a dead end. No, you've got to go down into the water. And I can't tell you, as I've had an opportunity to see so many people go through this transition over the years, being able to go on to so many different countries, even here. I've seen people kind of go through this transition, and I guarantee you, I have told more than one preacher, every single one of these people that were baptized this week, the most important Sunday of their life is going to be this Sunday. Because if they don't make it, you're probably not going to ever see them again. Because you know what happens? The devil is not a good loser. And he doesn't play fair. And I've seen it 100 times. And if you don't think, I think one of the problems of our current Christian Church of Christ culture is we don't give enough credit to the devil. Because all of a sudden, people that never cared about how often you went to church at your local Catholic place or wherever it is that they were going, all of a sudden it matters to them that you decided to find Jesus. Family members who have never mentioned anything biblical to you before are all of a sudden incensed that you have decided to become a child of God and leave the family religion? Oh, the devil does not play fair. A friend of mine got a job change. Went to an area of the country where the church isn't all that strong, perhaps, or didn't really have any connections, but he had to go because of his job. And I told him, you need to find church that first Sunday. You need to be there that first Sunday. You've got to go. You've got to be there that first Sunday. Make whatever it takes. You've got to make it there that Sunday. You have no idea how important it is to start off in your new life, in your new area, with that as an established, this is who we are as a family. I said, I promise you, you will find plenty of excuses as to why this Sunday, oh man, we still got boxes to unpack. Or as it turned out, a friend had come with them on their travel to help them on this, to drive one of their vehicles. Well, that friend doesn't go to church. So we spent time with her, and then she went on her way, and he didn't go. And the last 3 or 4 years that I've tried to call him, text him, no response. The devil is ready, and he has a lot of tricks, and he's willing to play dirty. And so when the Egyptians are bearing down on you, guess what? Just like the Egyptians bearing down on somebody like that with their old life is pulling at them to go back. Hey, you know, if we just throw up our hands right now, maybe the Egyptians will have mercy on us and we can just go back and pretend like nothing ever happened. But God's always going to provide a way. And I promise you, if you look back on your life, just think about it. I know some of the people sitting in here, and I know some of the struggles and some of the things that you've gone through over your life, and you know about mine. And you look back and you see those Red Seas parting in your own life, where it couldn't have been anybody else but God. Remember when I said how wide did that Red Sea parting have to be? Did it ever occur to you that in 600,000 people, it would have to have been so wide that perhaps they didn't even realize how they were getting from point A to point B until they were already on the other side and they saw the water come back down? That the panic was so great inside of you. Have you ever been that scared where the panic inside of you is so great that you don't know what happened between point A and point B, but I know I got to the other side and, well, I don't really remember the details of the middle. Yeah, I've been there. Willing to bet that in 600,000 people, there were quite a few of them that just didn't get it in the moment. Right? In the moment, the biggest concern on their head is there is a threat and they need to survive. And so they're going down the only path that they know to go down. When we think about our own Christian lives, in that transition, we kind of think, once we get it, once we understand that there's a threat to our souls, that our eternity is at stake, we understand, we get it. Hey, I've got to do something and I've got to get through. And sometimes, I know later in life, we kind of think, man, did I really know what I needed to know? And I promise you, for any new Christian. I've seen it happen 100 times. When the reality hits that you're actually leaving something behind, even though it's sinful, even though it's wrong, even though it's something that you've never told anybody else, it gets real uncomfortable to let that go. I've got too much pride built up into this. This sin is comfortable. I understand it. It understands me. It's nice to say we need to count the cost. But when the threat is that big, sometimes you just run for the closest help you've got. And the religious world takes advantage of that way, way too easily. Because when that first little bit of thirst for that old life comes back, and there's some discouragement, and perhaps a little bit of complaining and not understanding the rules, because I've left this old life where I'm comfortable in this culture of sin, and now I'm kind of going into this thing and I don't really understand all the new rules, and I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing right now. That old thirst comes into our lives again, and if we're persistent, God's got the solution for us. He can sweeten the water of whatever situation we're in. Whatever bitterness we find ourselves in, God can sweeten it. That's what we see in the New Testament, where he says, not because everything's going to work out, God can make anything work out for good. Life's not going to be easy. Bad things are going to happen. And those bad things, from that bad place, there is a path to goodness. That's the message. It's not that everything's going to work out always. It's that God's going to work it out in the end for good. Because plenty of bad has happened in my life. This transition is not easy. And when we have these delicate, newly freed slaves, a lot of times we call them babes in Christ, but sometimes maybe we need to think about them as newly freed slaves. We need to take care of them. We need to give them purpose. We need to help them understand the culture, the rules, the ideas, the doctrine that is so important for their souls. Not because it's the rules of this congregation, but because it's what God expects of all of us. This transition, and I know you've already had a lesson on baptism this week, but I love the similes between this transition from the old life to the new life. Because after that first little bit of bitterness, they get taught. They go to the mountain. And again, the devil takes one last swing at them, right? They build that golden calf. They don't have hardly anything. I mean, think about it. How much could they possibly be carrying? And they give enough gold and all of that to build this idol? Man, we're hard on them. But I'm no better. I'm no better. Tonight, appreciate your attention. I want us to close with a word of prayer. I'm going to ask Juan if he would lead us in that prayer. I want us to consider our own transition, because sometimes transition take a long time. Ultimately, the children of Israel were in 40 years worth of transition. We're all in transition still. I'm not where I want to be yet. My wandering is still happening until the day I die. The question is are you wandering towards God, or are you wandering back towards Egypt? One.
Our lives, Father. We're so thankful, Father, for all those that teach, Father, and that preserve the Word, Father. We know that this is salvation for all that are leading into your will, Father. Father, you are the potter, Father. We are the clay. We pray that you mold us, Father, that we may have that tender heart, Father, that always seek to serve you. For this opportunity to serve you, be kind and loving to this world, even when people do bad things to us, Father. We ask that you be with all those in our prayer list, Father, and all those that are suffering, for there are many suffering. There are many suffering spiritually as well, Father, become complacent in their lives, not coming to worship services, Father, deciding that other things are more important. There's nothing more important, Father, than serving you and glorifying Jesus, Father, being part of the body. We thank you, Father, for the military and our government and all the first responders that are safe. But we know that they're under your jurisdiction, Father. We ask that you bless all that are here, Father, and that we do what we can, Father, to